Alrighty, hello everyone. How's it going? I hope you all can see and hear me. If not, please let me know. I welcome you all to our global event, Socialize World, and we have just kickstarting our US sessions with this amazing topic for the day, which is Amazon's secret growth marketing strategies for surviving the pandemic and beyond. We'll also be talking a little bit about Renaissance marketer and what it means. And Rose, the speaker for today, will be highlighting a lot of aspects around Renaissance marketing and what marketers need to do to be not just surviving the pandemic, but also what they should be doing beyond this pandemic and the times to come. So before we jump into the session, here are quick event hashtags and social media handles you can use for your social media posting. Socialize World and SW 2021, those are the hashtags. And our Twitter handle is Digimind CI and Instagram handle is Digimind Life. So yeah, feel free to use those hashtags and tag us on your social media posts. We would love some social media love for sure. All right, so that is Rose Gia. Rose, are you on the video, I guess? Yeah, so Rose Gia, she's the head of growth marketing at Amazon Grocery. She'll be the one that will be leading the discussion for the day, and we are super excited for the topic for today. I hope and I wish you'll learn something from this session today. Before that, a quick look into the agenda for the rest of the day, which will be the last piece of the Socialized World. We'll be finishing this session on Amazon's growth strategy, and then we'll be having two different parallel sessions. One of them is for our clients exclusively, which is on what's new on Digimind Social. But another one, which is also for non-clients, any one of you who is not a client of Digimind can attend that. It's about the 6 benefits of making your brand socially intelligent. So yeah, I'm sure it's going to be another wonderful, useful session that will be done by our own Digimind team. Looking forward to that as well. Few quick things before we hop on to the actual speaking session. Just how to use the platform. If you're already attending the sessions from the morning, then you should be knowing how to use it. But just a quick wrap at how we should use the platform here. On the right side of your dashboard, you see a chat box. Make sure you interact with us on the event chat or also the stage chat. So yeah, feel free to ask us your questions on the stage chat. And once this is done, we'll be hopping on to your sessions, as I just mentioned. So if you see here on the left-hand side, you see a sessions tab, sorry. You can jump onto that so you can attend our sessions. All right. Yeah, a little more into what Rose Gia does. As I mentioned, she's the head of growth marketing at Amazon Grocery. She and her team have been driving profitable growth for Amazon Grocery through awareness, discovery, conversion, and go-to-market strategies. She's also been a Renaissance marketer, as I said, and she will be talking a little more about that in the session. Yeah, I think with that, we can kickstart our session for the day with Rose. Let me stop sharing my screen, and Rose, you can start sharing your screen.
Excellent. Super excited. So give me 1 second, everyone.
Yeah.
All right. Hopefully you guys can see that.
I see your screen.
Excellent. Yeah. I'll hide that. Awesome. Well, hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here, and I feel very privileged to be able to talk to you guys about this topic in particular. We're going to be talking about the secret growth marketing strategies for surviving the pandemic and beyond, and then how do you embrace your inner Renaissance marketer. So first, let me see if this thing works. First, I just want to talk a little bit about who I am and why I can speak to this topic. Durga already kind of mentioned a little bit of my background, but as mentioned, I currently lead growth marketing for one of Amazon's fastest growing businesses called Ultra Fast Grocery. This includes brands like Amazon Fresh and Whole Foods on Amazon. And what this really means is my team is responsible for driving awareness, discovery, and conversion across the customer's decision journey when it comes to shopping groceries. In the past, I have actually led a ton of different types of digital marketing, including Small Business Saturday and Shop Small, which was one of American Express's biggest marketing initiatives. And I've also founded 2 startups, one about deep diving into how technology is disrupting traditional industries, and the other one about gamifying whiskey education. So I'll talk a little bit about this later on when I talk about the Renaissance marketer, but essentially I've done a number of different things, from being an investment banker to being an operator to having invented things, and then clearly now I do a ton of marketing. But in all of my experiences, the most important thing that I focus on is all about driving growth. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, here are some secret growth marketing strategies that I employ with my team. The first is really understanding your customer. And I'm sure you guys all have probably already done this, but this is something I focus on quite a bit, and I ensure that my team thinks about all the time, which is when you know what your customers' needs and wants are, and you know how your product and service is able to address that, this makes that connection so much easier when you're trying to do marketing. So the more you understand your customer, their decision journey, the pain points that they go through in their journey, the more you can build growth marketing tactics that can really help address those pain points, but also shift customers from one stage of their journey to the next. The second thing, the second strategy that I employ is really discovering the top drivers of growth and scaling them effectively. And so that means asking questions like, what part of growth are you trying to actually drive? Is it the number of customers? Is it the spend per customer? Is it time on site? There are many, many things that you guys can think of that. In order to really think about that, I like to just take a step back and really talk about what drives growth for the company overall. And there are many ways that you guys can think about it, but this quadrant format is the one that I like the most. So starting from the bottom left in that blue box, you'll see market penetration. This one is relatively easy. It's just trying to get more people in the same market to buy your existing product. If you move up to the yellow box on the top left, then we're talking about market development, meaning you're expanding to a new market with an existing product. And of course, at the bottom right is about product development. So that means you are you're building a brand new product for an existing market. And then the top right green is diversification, which is about building a new product and a new market. The best example of kind of diversification and how this all kind of comes together is clearly Amazon. Amazon started with being seller of books online and then expanded to selling CDs. Then there was music, then there was video, and then now there's groceries. So that really shows kind of the evolution of growth for a business. For growth marketing in particular, we tend to focus on driving top line or revenue growth. So that's basically, boiling it down to the simplest terms. It's all about driving the number of units times the dollars generated per unit. And when we're talking about unit, it could be any measure, including number of customers or the number of products sold. Thus, when we're identifying what are the top drivers of growth, I like to think about efficacy. And I define efficacy as scale, which usually the proxy that we use is impression volume, and efficiency, which we usually use return on investment. Because not all channels and touch points are created equal, it becomes very important for you guys to think about pairing the first strategy that I talked about, which is knowing what your customers actually want and how your product and service addresses that want, with the second strategy, which is leveraging the top most effective drivers of growth. Being effective means you can't just think about being extremely efficient, because that means you don't get that scale, or having high scale, but you never actually convert. So it's really about balancing the two. And the third strategy is really about this idea of investing for the future. And the reason I talk about this is, if you think about growth marketing, it is a ton of test and learn programs. But if you don't know where you want to be in the future, then you're going to be building a ton of great programs that might not lead anywhere. So it's really important to always have in the back of your head what you're actually planning for the future. And this becomes very relevant when we're talking later on, when I give that example about how we're thinking about the pandemic and how we're thinking about beyond the pandemic. So in order to really think about kind of investing for the future, I always tell my team to really shift their mindset from growth, which implies infinite capacity and infinite resources, to investment. And investment means that there are finite resources and finite capacity. So you have to be very focused on what you're trying to drive and what you're trying to shift. The second thing is really to get away from talking about a marketing budget to talking about a marketing investment. And the reason here is because budget implies that there are these short-term costs, whereas investment means you are spending today, but you're investing for the future. So there are long-term benefits yet to be realized. So the questions that you want to ask in this stage is really, things like, what platforms are your customers flocking to? What new platforms, that is? What is your return on investment for each of the paid activities that you run? And how are you measuring short-term conversion with long-term value of a customer? And the third thing, I've already alluded to this, but it's really to move away from this idea of just constant short-term wins to long-term gains. And this really means thinking about, what do you have to do today to ensure that you're still relevant for your customers in 6 to 12 months' time? And this means things like building foundations. So you might want to invest in SEO today because it takes about 3 to 6 months for Google to be able to understand the relevance of your information. Or things like building targeting capability or data infrastructure. So there's a lot of foundations that you might want to consider investing in today to help you in the future. And another thing to really think about investing today is about driving awareness of your brand. Awareness is notorious for being really, really hard to measure because you're trying to affect something today that will get benefits 3 to 6 months down the line, in which your customers are going to be exposed to a number of other touch points and a number of other marketing. So it's really, really hard to measure, but we know that awareness works. Because if you think about, anything that you do, any purchase decisions you're about to make, the first brands that come to mind, how did that come to mind? It's probably because those brands spent a lot of time investing in awareness and knew that 3 to 6 months down the line or a year, when you're thinking about making that purchase decision, their brands are the first things that come to mind. So it's really important to think about these things as you're thinking about investing for the future. Now, the best way to kind of put it all together is to explain using a campaign that we ran in 2020 to kind of pull together all of these growth strategies. So the first strategy that we talked about, which is knowing your customer. So for years, online grocery was slowly getting adoption. In January and February 2020, online grocery penetration was only 10% of the grocery shopping experience, meaning that 90% of customers were still going into stores because that's been traditionally how you buy groceries. So online ordering was still a very foreign concept for the majority of customers out there. However, when the pandemic happened, search interest for grocery delivery skyrocketed, as you can see in this chart here. Consumers during the pandemic needed a safe and easy way to shop groceries. So taking the second strategy, which is about discovering your top growth drivers, we knew that this was going to be an acquisition moment, and because of this increased interest. And so we had to make sure that we were investing in the right places. And so we really looked into, where do we think customers will be and when they want to look for this information about what online grocery service to use. So we determined that the two best channels to be in at that point in time was going to be search and social. Search is very obvious, right? Because this is where most people do a lot of their research. And especially during the pandemic, as shown in this chart, people's search interest skyrocketed. They wanted to understand
Rose,
what were, yes.
Wait a second. I just still see your understand your customer slide.
Oh,
sure.
no.
Yeah.
All right. Let me go back. Tell me. All right. So I've been just like talking about, and then none of the slides came through. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me if you guys see it now.
Not yet. Do you want to stop sharing and start sharing again?
Yeah, let me try that
online?
again.
Yeah.
Let me try that again. I was on a roll too. All right.
I'm sorry. I just checked that. I'm so sorry.
No, not at all. Apologies for everybody who's like, why is it just one slide? All right. How's that looking?
Yeah. Now I see your slides. Could you scroll like front and back?
Yeah. Is it? Hold on. You guys see this
That's
now?
good. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna just quickly rewind back and just go through these slides very quickly so then we can kind of level set. So we talked about the first strategy, which is about understanding your customers. This is the second strategy, which is really understanding your top drivers of growth and scaling them very effectively. So I mentioned before is asking questions like, well, what part of growth are you trying to scale and trying to drive? Things like number of customers, spend per customer, time on site, etc. I talked about earlier about kind of the different quadrants of growth. And I'm not going to go through them again, but essentially the idea is the business itself, as it's growing, will go through these kind of different quadrants and with different focus. As a growth marketer, the goal is to understand, well, what parts of this growth can we affect? And in that case, we typically are thinking about top line or revenue growth. And so when we look at that and boil it down to its most simplistic terms, we're looking at two components. The first component is number of units. And the second component is the dollars generated per unit. And so when we talk about unit, it could be anything from a customer to the number of products you're selling. But the goal is these are the two components as a growth marketer we can affect. Now, how do we affect it is kind of dependent on what channels we want to employ, right? So again, the second strategy is looking at the top drivers of growth. So we have to figure out what are the channels that are going to drive growth. Now, when we're looking at that, I always tell my team to focus on efficacy. And the way that I define efficacy is, as you can see here, is about scale and efficiency. So scale is really, we use a proxy of impression volume to look at scale. So how many customers can you reach very quickly and very easily? And then there's efficiency, which is usually measured by return on investment. So sometimes we're looking at conversion, sometimes you're looking at click-through rate, whatever your kind of like return on investment metric is. But the most important piece that I want to highlight here is you can't think about just one or the other. Every time you're looking at a top driver of growth, you have to focus on efficacy, which is the combination of both. Because there's no point in you being extremely efficient in a channel where there's only 50 people on that channel. And at the same time, there's no point in you being extremely effective at reaching millions and millions of customers that never end up converting on your product. So it's really important to always have the balance of both. And so that way you can focus on which channels are going to give you both. And the third is about investing in the future. And let me know if any of the slides are no longer working again. But I'm just gonna go through these slides. But essentially what we're looking at here is shifting your mind, right? I talked a little bit about shifting your mindset from just growth to investment. And you'll see here, the goal of all of this is really around understanding what it is that you're doing today that's going to affect your future. And this is most important for growth because we can't just think about getting everyone to do something today, especially when your customers are going to be ever changing throughout their customer journeys. So today, the thing that they like might actually shift 3 to 6 months down the line. So you need to be future-proof. And in order to be future-proof, you need to think about the future in investment terms. So again, being extremely focused and strategic about what you're investing in today to help drive growth in the future. So now we're on to the example. As I mentioned before, when the pandemic happened, we were very focused on the first strategy, which is like knowing our customers. And at that point in time, we actually knew that majority of our customers were not using online grocery as a service. That's because we understood that the act of shopping groceries is something that has been inherently for generations done in store. So the act of having to do this online was very foreign. But when the pandemic hit, customers were really looking for an easy but safe solution. So they flocked to online as kind of a means to do that. And when that happened, we knew that this was an acquisition moment, and we knew that we had to be strategic about where we're going to be. So the second strategy that I talked about, which is about discovering your top drivers of growth and really thinking about that efficacy, scale, and efficiency, we thought about there being two channels that were most important. So the two channels were search. And as I was saying before, search is extremely, it was a very clear choice for us because that is typically how most people do research to begin with. But during the pandemic, that was really the number one source of traffic because people were looking for this. And therefore, we wanted to make sure we were there and present. The second piece was actually social. So at this point in time, if you guys remember, there were a lot of kind of shift in terms of time spent from kind of other places like TV, broadcast, and into more of the streaming channels and into social media. And so we knew that social was actually where everybody was flocking to for their communications. This is where they were learning kind of real time what was happening. But this was also how they were getting their source of entertainment. So we knew that these two channels were going to be the place with the most amount of scale, reach, but also places that we knew if we had the right information for them, we would be able to convert. So the first thing we did was we relaunched our grocery landing page with pertinent information about safety. So quote, what we called contact-free delivery and convenience, getting fast delivery during these times. So we optimized for SEO to help us build authority in the grocery delivery category. And we were able to kind of measure the increase in page rankings moving from many, many pages later to the first and second pages of Google. And eventually we were also able to look at kind of downstream conversion. Next, we produced how-to online grocery content on social. So we knew that people were still hesitant about using this type of service despite the interest. So we produced these very light content to really help drive that this is something that's very easy to use. So we use organic social to provide this educational content, and then we leverage paid to drive scale and conversion. And later on, we were able to measure both reach as well as return on investment. So after doing these first two strategies, right, of understanding your customer, discovering the top drivers, we really focus on the third part of the growth strategy, which is investing in the future. So within search and social, we did a number of new tests around messaging and targeting, and we explored new ways of going after new social channels, going after new ad formats within search. And then we thought really hard about building long-term content. So we knew that this was something that we were going to have to do continuously regardless, right? Where no matter how much people were thinking about using grocery delivery services during the pandemic, their innate choice was always to do what they were used to doing for many, many years. And in many, many generations, which is to go into stores. So how do we kind of affect that mindset change over time? We wanted to build really clear content and build a lot of SEO behind it to really help educate customers on the benefits and value of doing online grocery, especially with Amazon. And so that meant we invested a ton of time in ensuring that our pages were extremely technically and keyword optimized for search engines. So when customers are thinking about grocery, other grocery choices, that we come first. We also spent a lot of time driving awareness. We knew that, again, with the spike in interest, people were still hesitant. So there were things that we needed to ensure that we told customers to ensure that they were comfortable with our services. So during the pandemic, we really focused on driving awareness around the idea of safety and convenience. So we spent a lot of our messaging around that. Now we're actually focused on still convenience, but now really talking about the other aspects of online grocery, which is the quality and freshness of the groceries themselves. So I know we're going to do Q&A later, and so I'm sure there will be questions, but I do want to focus a part of my session, as Durga mentioned, on something that is extremely dear to me and something I'm very passionate about, which is how you can actually develop these growth marketing skills. And clearly, I have in the slide that the spoiler is you already have it, because you can tap into your inner Renaissance marketer capabilities to drive innovation. So let me talk about innovation real fast. So innovation has oftentimes been equated with net new, never been discovered ideas. But let's be honest, that's completely rare at this point. In the thousands of years that we've been on this earth, Almost everything that could be considered net new has already been created, discovered, or at least thought of. But innovation isn't just about net new, right? It's about bringing together disparate information and reshaping it in a way that is new and different, which is essentially how we think about creativity. And a professor, Robert Root Bernstein, had this quote about creativity and actually about creative people that I really loved, which is, what characterizes the most creative individuals is an ability to discover connections between apparently unrelated domains of activity. The artist and the scientist, the sculptor and the mathematician, the musician and the programmer. What this means is that marketers are in the perfect intersection where art, science, and creativity come together, and therefore marketers are primed to be the new Renaissance thinkers. So how does this all come together with growth? If you think about what growth is inherently cross-discipline, right? As a growth marketer, you're looking at multiple angles. You're connecting the dots between marketing, product, customer service, data, technology, financial metrics, you name it. And so that's actually how we describe the Renaissance marketer, which is those who go beyond a specific channel or skill set, who have breadth of knowledge and depth of skill, and can employ multiple disciplines from history to psychology to science for marketing. And so that's why growth marketers are part of the Renaissance marketer set, because we use the same mindset. So the Renaissance marketer mindset that I espouse and I try to kind of get everyone to buy into is first becoming multidisciplined. So it's about knowing when to pull ideas from other disciplines like history, like psychology, like finance, into marketing, and knowing and understanding how various functions work together. So how does brand and CX come together with product and data and finance? And that's how you kind of think about driving growth and innovation. And this is what I kind of think about as well. As I mentioned before, I was an investment banker when I first started my career, and I moved into finance and then eventually into marketing. But even through all of that, I was very curious about all of the other disciplines that I wasn't aware of. And I pulled a lot of that thinking into the things that I do today. So being able to think about growth marketing was really thinking about how do you drive growth in general? And how do you think about driving growth is really connected with how are other businesses doing it? How are other disciplines doing it? And how do you employ some of those ideas that might not be new to those disciplines into marketing and into your business? And that becomes this new and innovative idea. The second thing for this mindset is really about reframing activities for the long term. I talked a ton about this at the beginning when we're talking about, discovering the top drivers of growth, but it really is the same. It's always thinking about how do you invest for the future? And Renaissance marketers think about the future because they're constantly looking at different things and pulling it together. So you're constantly innovating, and that is inherently about the future. But it's also important to always think about your activities as, again, investments versus costs. This will help you reshape what you actually want to focus on. And that's actually going to help you become a better marketer. And the third is about balancing between the art and the science. I know historically within the marketing world, there's been a ton of kind of tug and pull between what people, traditional marketers, brand marketers think of, which is very much the art of communicating to your customers, as well as the newly kind of more programmatic, data-driven marketers, which is all about the science and the data. But the reality is it's really important to actually balance the two. Because if you think about who your customers are, they're not one way or the other. There are moments in time that they are going to be connected to emotional things that you talk about when it comes to your brand, your product, and your service. But there are going to be other times when they're trying to pick between the two that they're going to be very focused on the data. So they're going to want to know, is this cheaper? Is this faster? And things like that. So you as a marketer need to be able to do both, to look at communications with your customers at both a art and as well as a science format. So like I said, I leverage this mindset kind of every day, and I call myself a Renaissance marketer. And this is something that I know inherently is actually part of every marketer, but I want these traits to come out because I believe that's how we're going to drive and change the marketing world, but also drive a tremendous amount of growth for business. So if you want to learn more, please check out renaissancemarketer.com. I also welcome a ton of feedback on it. This is something I'm building out, so definitely please reach out and please provide as much feedback as you want. So that being said, I'm now open to questions.
Hey, Rose, do you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. A lot of great insights and a lot of sorry, my camera is closed. Yeah, a lot of great insights, and a lot of interesting approaches towards growth strategies. All my attendees here, feel free to type your questions. I have a question before we have any other questions flowing in, Rose. I know, especially like I can't even imagine how challenging your job must have been during the pandemic, given you are into ultra fast grocery delivery and stuff, right? So my question is, how is your I know you talked a little bit about content strategy and how you had to optimize for SEO and stuff, but could you tell us a little more about what your approach towards that was and how you had to line up your team towards that common goal? Like, what are those challenges there?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things, and I'll give you guys a quick background. So going in 2019, we were planning for a very different 2020, and so we had this kind of idea of we knew we had to build a ton of customer education because online grocery is foreign, and we had a kind of a number of things that we were going to slowly get to over time. We were still very focused on let's at least I mentioned earlier market penetration. We wanted to make sure at the very least those who were aware of online grocery, we were getting more people into it. So for 2020, I had a totally different view for my team, what our goals were. When March hit and we knew the world was going to change, we reassessed. And what I had my team think about was it goes back to the first strategy, which is like know your customers. Things changed and we had to react very quickly, but we also had to make sure that we were addressing what customers were really concerned about. I could have spent all day talking about how awesome Amazon online grocery is, but that wouldn't have mattered. What customers really wanted to know at that point is, one, how quickly can I get food? Because this is very important and it's a necessity. And two, how safe is it? And so all of the customer education things that we were going to build out, we had to pull forward. And so I had my team reassess kind of if we had to build this content, we have to build it for the now. With a thought for what the future would be, but really it's for the now. So how quickly can we react and how quickly can we put things out? It took us, usually, I don't know if anybody else is aware, but usually in a big company, building content from the very beginning of like designing the information, putting it out there, doing the marketing, usually takes many, many months. We did it in a series of, I would say like 2 months. So we were just kind of like in and out like very quickly. And so that's kind of how we thought about it, which was really, let's make sure that the information our customers are looking for, we have it very prominently. And then let's make sure that we are constantly updating it. So my team was basically updating our grocery landing page every 2 weeks with the latest information, because we wanted to make sure that if customers were looking for it, they knew what we were doing from a safety standpoint, they knew what was happening from a convenience standpoint. And this is something that was really, really helpful.
Got it. Got it. Thanks a lot for that, Rose. That was very detailed. But yeah, I think as you rightly mentioned, most of us were running, fastening our strategies. I guess probably what we have planned for 6 to 7 months had to be crushed into 2 months and do everything in those 2 months' time. Awesome. Another question I had was mostly about, brand reputation during these times. I was just wondering, just because, you talked about contactless delivery and stuff. So my question is, when things probably didn't go right, let's say, the customer wasn't happy with the kind of delivery that was done, or you talked about keeping the groceries fresh. So my question is, if you had situations like that, what was your strategy in countering those, or in at least what was your strategy there, to help Amazon's reputation?
Yeah, it was one of those things that we knew no one was going to be able to do this right. It was like, if you think about what was happening at that point in time, it was definitely a lot of craziness. And so our priority at that point was really just to get as many available delivery slots as we can. If many of you guys are probably not aware of this, and honestly, I wasn't even that into this before I joined the grocery business, but the grocery business is really about operations, right? So it's about physically ensuring that people can get the deliveries to you in the fastest way possible. But if you also think about what was happening is all those people that were doing this are also people. And we wanted to make sure that we focus on their safety as well as the safety of our customers. So it was like this constant tug and pull of, can we get this as quickly as possible for our customers, but keeping it extremely safe? Yeah. But the second thing is we also knew, and we saw that too, was customers gave us a lot of leeway. Nobody was, if let's say something was like an item was missing or there's an item that was like out, customers were not complaining. They were just like, I'm just thankful that I can actually get groceries at this point because everything else is shut down. And so we knew that there was a level of trust that we built with our customers. And so we did everything in our power to make sure that it was the best experience, but we also recognized that it was just tough. And so one of the things that I would say we learned over time is because of the things that happened very quickly during COVID, we, built out a lot of operations. We built out a ton of kind of like even the way that we're talking to customers. We also learned a lot of the pain points that we were hitting. And so that helped us kind of, again, change all of our product roadmaps. Like if you ask any of my colleagues, our tech roadmaps, our operations roadmaps, our market, like everything changed. And so, but it helps us now to really think about how do we make this an even better experience going to the rest of this year and into the future.
Interesting. Yeah, I like what you mentioned about how customers gave a lot of leeway. I think that's where I start thinking empathy goes both ways, not just from the brands to customers, but also backwards. Awesome. Thanks for that, Rose. I see a question here. Aurelian says that totally agree with the art plus science combination, but what is your advice to balance the two and when? I mean, on which criteria do you decide whether you're too much art or too much science?
That's a great question. And it's something I would say this is where, growth marketing comes into play, which is it's all about that test and learn. Depending on your customers and also depending on what it is that your brand, product and service is trying to address, there are certain things that resonate much better and there are certain things that don't. It's also dependent on where the customer journey is. There is and I highly advise this if you guys haven't read it, McKinsey put out a customer decision journey research. So you can just Google that a couple of years ago. And I thought that was a really comprehensive way of thinking about how a customer goes through their purchase decision. And one of the things that they highlighted throughout the experience that I kind of use when I think about art and science is when customers are first, thinking about like a brand that comes to mind, like let's say I'm hungry and the first thing that comes to mind is like I could either eat here or do this. Those brands that come top of mind, all of that came from some sort of awareness marketing from those brands. That awareness marketing usually works really well when it's a lot of the art. So a lot of the emotional attributes, right? That why is this brand really awesome? And that's going to stick in me as a customer's brain for a while. But when a customer moves from that decision to, okay, well, now I want to do some research. Maybe I'm not bought into the brands that I thought of. I want to do some research to figure out what other brands are out there. That's where the art and the science kind of have to balance out, because when people are trying to explore, they're going to want to know the why, which usually tends to be a lot more the emotional, but also like, how is this really different, right? They're going to get into the nitty gritty details of like, yeah, but yours is like $5 more expensive than the other guy. So that's where it's like, depending on the channel, you're going to have to really do that balance. And then the next part of that stage is really, it goes back to, and McKinsey talks about this, is moment of purchase. This is what we're all aware of, conversion. You're going to pick between A or B. That is when everybody is extremely functional. That's like where usually a chart of like my stuff is better than the others works really well. This is like where our science 100% comes to play. And then if you go through the cycle of their journey, it's like after they converted, they're going to have this post-purchase experience. And this goes back to then again, it's going to be less so of the functional and then more so the emotional. So again, this is where the art comes back, where you have to really think about, now my customer is experiencing my brand and my product and my service. What do they love about it? How do I dial that up? How do I create that experience even more for my customers? So that way, the next time they go through this decision journey, they always pick me. And so that's where kind of a little bit more of the art has to kind of play out. So I would say, and my advice, and apologies, I know this is not really like a very simple way, but it's to really look through the customer journey, understand what your customers are looking for throughout their journey, and then test to see kind of what degree of art and science really gets the customer to move into the next stage. A great question.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Rose. I think it all boils back down to your first slide, understand your customer, I guess. Thank you for that, Rose. We have another question here from Maria. Maria says, thanks, Rose, for your fascinating presentation. I'm wondering whether the things you knew about your customers pre-pandemic have changed during the pandemic. In other words, did you have to understand the customer anew, or were you able to use customer insight from the past? Did customer concerns change? It's a long question.
That's a wonderful question. So I would say it's one of those, and this is where I bring in my Renaissance marketer hat, where I was a history major in college, and I absolutely agree with history repeats itself, but also behaviors take a lot of time to kind of change. So a lot of the insights that we learned pre-pandemic about how grocery customers think about online grocery versus kind of physical grocery very much stayed intact, right? So it is this, customers are wondering, yes, it's convenient, but I'm so used to going into the store and touching all of the fruits and vegetables. How is this going to change my experience? And so those were the things that we knew going into the pandemic, that coming out of the pandemic, that's still going to be a focus. During the pandemic, a lot of customers kind of put that aside because it was about convenience and necessity. And so I would say, instead of the insights necessarily having changed, we just added a new layer of insight, which means during certain points in time, and of course, this feels like, when I say now, it feels like very duh, but during different points in time for a customer, there are different needs that needs to be addressed. And so when things are hunky-dory, it becomes a choice of do I want to do online to save time so I can do other things, or do I want to go into the stores, etc. It was a choice. During times when it was no longer a choice, then it becomes how do I do it the most effective and safe way? And so what we learned coming out of this is really ensuring that when we communicate to our customers, knowing what was happening, right? So this basically will be something we take into the future, which is, let's say there was a situation happening in a city where they had a specific lockdown. Let's say it's political unrest. Maybe it's a weather issue. There's going to be a moment in time where the choice of doing different types of grocery shopping is going to be limited. So we want to communicate differently there. We might want to then communicate about the convenience factor, the safety factor. In other moments in time when customers have multiple choices, then we really want to dial up the value of why online grocery is more convenient, saves time, and really help solve some of the pain points that we saw earlier pre-pandemic, which is, how do I know that everything is fresh and quality? So we're doing a lot of that right now, is expressing how we tell customers how our things are very fresh and very quality, how our pickers and shoppers are just as knowledgeable and they've done their training, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how we think about it.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Rose. I hope that answered your question, Maria. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to send them here. And everyone, we have 10 more minutes, so please feel free to type any of the questions you have. Rose, I have a question for you. Talking about Renaissance Marketer, I know it's a very interesting concept. I love the sort of framework that you presented here. But my question is, it's pretty much like bringing back entrepreneurial sort of mindset, where you're involved in different things, bringing in different perspectives to one business function. I love that. But my question is, how challenging or easy is it to bring in such kind of a thought process or mindset into organizations like Amazon or any of those big companies? I feel like it's challenging. So I would love to know from you.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's actually something we're solving for. We're actually building out content right now for how do you as a marketer communicate to your other functions in a way that gets them to buy into what you're trying to do. So the first thing I would say is, I think about marketing as kind of the the connection, like the connective tissue between all of the businesses, right? So when we talked about before, and I was mentioning about like kind of, all businesses are trying to grow and they're growing in different ways. Marketers are kind of in that middle ground of like, we're connected to both the financial metrics, the customer service, how the data works, the product, the CX, like we're kind of like in the mix of everything. So we're that connective tissue. But over time, what has happened is the focus has been less so on kind of what marketers bring as a value, and has kind of narrowed it to, well, you only run a certain type of advertising campaign. You only do XYZ. And so kind of what the value of marketing has been diminished, I think, over time. So what I wanted to bring back was actually, we're still doing the same things. Like we're still connecting to all these all these different teams within an organization, but we need to actually rebrand ourselves and talk about the value that we bring. And the most important thing is, when you talk to a finance person and you spend all of your time talking about the emotional aspect of like getting a customer like to be really happy, they're not going to care, because in their mind, their goal is really, are you driving top line? Are you driving revenues? What's your ROI? So being able to know what they're expecting and then tying that back to what they're expecting becomes the most important. So with a finance person, it's about these marketing investments produce this type of ROI, and this is the timeline that we're looking at to see that growth happen. Yeah. When you say stuff like that, finance people love it and they want to invest, because for them, they're seeing their version of what you're saying. Same with like, data. Sometimes the hardest thing is talking to product engineering teams. And for them, again, they're trying to build something. So if you're up there in the clouds of like how amazing this thing is, they're not going to see how this ties back. But if you're able to explain, a customer is going through this pain point, here's the customer, here's the research that we've done, here's the research externally, here's some data points to show you, where their pain points is. Then you can talk to product and engineering and say, here's what I believe this product is doing to help address, and here's how I would communicate it. And so again, it goes back to the Renaissance marketer mindset is all about connecting these dots, but also using the language of these different functions to help you make the case that you're doing. Because like I said, we're not doing anything different. We're just shifting the way that we talk about what we're doing, so it brings value to the overall kind of business.
Got it. I think that's excellent. I think I can't even imagine the kind of synergy that's going to build between the departments and business functions. Fantastic. I don't see any other questions coming from the audiences, but I have a follow-up question to what Maria was asking. It was more about understanding consumers real time. So my question is, during the pandemic, how were you and your consumer insights team working together? I don't know. I mean, like, what was the strategy? Like, how were your departments aligned in terms of like reaching towards a common goal or strategy during that time?
Yeah. So this is something I would say probably a lot of companies were doing similar things, but essentially we've always had these what we call internally mechanisms, ways of working with different teams, and they were at a certain cadence. When the pandemic happened, we knew that cadence had to change. But not just that, we were all working, from home. So again, that working dynamic was changing. So we couldn't just walk over to colleagues and just ask them directly. It was like you had to ensure that we were over communicating. So the way that, we knew that things were shifting so fast, and we wanted to make sure that we were extremely close, like our ears are close to the ground to our customers. And so our customer insights teams did a really great job. They worked with a lot of external research firms who were already doing this type of just on their end, but also doing surveys with our customers. Our data teams were producing a lot of content, but the most important piece was we were connecting on a weekly, if not a daily basis, on if any of that would shift how we would communicate to our customers. At the end of the day, a lot of this research is like super important, but if we're not using it to communicate to our customers in the right way, it becomes moot. So we were spending a ton of time on a daily, weekly timeline. We had a Slack group, and it was like, just what is happening? And we would address that and say, hey, actually, we think that we need to do X, Y, Z. One really good example of this was when we first launched the grocery education page. It was supposed to be a lot more very emotional, like the value and all this stuff. Pandemic hit, we're like, let's just be very focused on what it is and how does this help. We also started creating a list of FAQs. And originally we just put in a few because we knew those were the top questions that customer insights have identified. And then over time, what we started doing was we created a mechanism in which our customer insights team could start producing more of this, and they could even put in those FAQs on their own. So it was trying to take away some of the blockers that would kind of reduce how fast information could get to our customers by creating these new mechanisms to empower our different internal partners to kind of run on their own. So that was probably something I thought was like a great partnership between us and our customer insights team.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking based on what you just said, I think for you during the pandemic, you didn't even have to work on the art piece of your growth marketing, the emotion piece, because I think the pandemic just pushed everyone down the funnel and, so you didn't need to create the emotion and stuff there. Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I have like one more question from my end, but I'm just looking to see if you have any coming from the audiences. Nothing yet from them. So I'll ask my question then. So regarding conversions, I know you talked about conversions and conversion metrics. Now, my question is, how did you set the expectations for conversions during the pandemic? Because a lot of things changed. For some companies, the digital usage has drastically changed. And no one really knew what to expect from conversions. Was it like a lower number or a higher number? So my question is, how did you chase that challenge and how did you address that?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And I would say we care. So my team cares about like all aspects of that customer journey, right? So we're like awareness, discovery, and conversion. And we know that conversion is the easiest thing to measure. And so we have, annual goals and whatnot. Of course, a lot of that went out the window the moment the pandemic hit. Yeah. What we saw was things, as I mentioned before, we knew it was going to be an acquisition moment with or without us because there was a need there. So there was like a push and an acceleration of adoption. And so for me, it was less so about worrying about the conversion, and it was more so, are we giving customers the right information, right? Because it goes back to what I was saying before. When there is no choice, customers do not care about you and they will just use you. But when there's choice in the future, if they didn't have a good experience with you or they didn't realize what the value of you were, then they're just going to go back to before, or maybe your competitors had a better value prop during this time and they'll go over there. So for me, it was really important to say, we're going to have these people that are going to be trying online grocery for the first time. That experience is going to be a little bit wonky just given the times that we're in. But how do we ensure that we're communicating the right value to them, as well as trying to ensure that the experience is as best as it can be? And so for me, I actually had my team focus a lot more on that initial setup. So it was like ensuring in every placement that we had, we were very clear, like you've got like 2-hour grocery delivery slots. It was also ensuring that we talked about, this is the convenience. It's easier for you to do this online so you can do other things. It's safer because we're keeping it contact free. But those are the value points that I wanted customers to take with them afterwards, because I knew once they had choice and they're like, well, I can do other things. I wanted to make sure it's like, oh, right. The thing that I just learned how to do during the pandemic carries forward to past, beyond the pandemic. It's not just like a thing I did during the pandemic. It's something I would do on an ongoing basis. So that's kind of where my focus was on, less so on the actual conversion part.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for that, Rose. That makes total sense. Give me a second. I see a comment here. Just want to make sure that's a question. Yeah, I have a question from Shijin Wu. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but Shijin is asking, you mentioned understand customers first. Do you have any tips like the approach or resources to better understand customers?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are multiple ways, and I would say in any company, you should always employ kind of 3 things. First is you should always look at primary research. So if you don't have it, like an insights team, you should get a vendor or whatnot. But the idea is you should understand and ask directly to your existing customers and future customers what makes your product, service, brand valuable. So we call that primary research. You also need to look at secondary research. So it's things like, what is the competitive landscape? What is the category you're in? What's happening in there? And usually this you can curate and purchase with different companies that run this type of very general wide research. But that's going to give you kind of an understanding outside of your customer base, what is happening in the broader scope, because what's happening in that trend is going to affect how your customers are going to behave. And the third is data. And so this goes back to, when it comes to research insights, there are like the research part, which happens to be like surveys and qualitative, where you do like interviews, but then there's also the data part. And what I think of is like data tells you behaviorally how people are reacting. So they're telling you exactly what they're clicking on, what they're actually buying, what is their action that they're doing. But the research is going to tell you why they're doing it. Why are they picking that thing at this cadence and this frequency? Why are they choosing you over that competitor? So when you have the two together, that's going to tell you the holistic picture of that customer. And there are a number of different vendors out there that can help with this, but it's something definitely to always keep in mind at the very beginning, is like, how do you ensure not only do you do this, once, but you do this on a regular basis, so that way you always have the most important information. And then the second advice I would give you is always make sure that you can connect the two. Connect your data with the research. So connect your how with the why, and that's going to give you a fuller picture.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for that, Rose. That was fantastic. I think that's pretty much it from my end. I also don't see any more questions coming here on the chat. I think, yeah, that's it, Rose. Thanks a lot once again for your time and all the great insights you've shared with us. It was a fantastic presentation, and I'm very sure our audiences have learned something today from this session.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It was a pleasure doing this, and I love the questions. If you guys have more, feel free to reach out, and I look forward to doing this again in the future.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Rose. And all the attendees here, feel free to jump to the sessions tab on this dashboard. We have another session going on after this. We'll see you there. And after that, we can wrap up this event. All right. See you all there on the sessions. Bye.